This is Chris. Some people might know me from my Instagram shrimpery. I get a lot of questions on there where people are asking if I can do like a maintenance video or some sort of algae tutorial. So because I get asked so much, I figured I would. I just want to start off by saying, if you have another way to manage algae that works for you, just use that. This is just what works for me. If it seems shocking to you or upsetting to you, you don't have to do it. It just works for me. So I actually used to have a lot of really bad algae problems. It took me a while to figure out what I was doing wrong, and I really actually would have appreciated having some sort of like really simple guide or someone just telling me, hey, look, this is what you got to do. There's other things you could do. You don't have to do this. There are two main types of algae that you'll encounter in your aquarium usually. The one that all tanks have, because it comes from spores in the air, is diatomaceous algae, which is softer and would include like spot algae. The other type of algae that not all tanks have, for example, my tanks don't have it, is filamentous algae, which includes like hair algae. And you get filamentous algae from contaminating your tank with untreated plants, fish, driftwood, whatever. So I really tried to avoid using like full-grown plants from someone else's tank. I usually use tissue culture plants. If I do have to use someone's full-grown plants, I make sure to dip them for 5 minutes in a 1 part bleach, 18 parts water solution. So by bleaching them in this diluted bleach solution and then dechlorinating them, you can actually kill any algae that came along with the plants, believe it or not. And that's how I've managed to avoid introducing hair algae or any other filamentous algae to my tanks. So if you have a bunch of snails in your tank, it's a huge annoyance. The good thing about the bleaching method is not only does it kill the algae, it also kills snails or any other pests that decide to tag along with your plants. It's okay if you have some diatomaceous algae in your tank, or really even some filamentous algae. Algae is a natural part of any aquatic environment, whatever. But if it's in excess, that means you have an imbalance in your tank. If you have excess nutrients in the tank, that's really the only situation where algae can thrive. Healthy plants will always outcompete algae if you have sufficient plant mass. So really, if you keep your nutrients at a minimum, you can keep your algae at a minimum. One part of managing excess nutrients is managing your nitrogenous wastes. And the way to do that is by using an extremely oversized filter like I do. If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I use Eheim external canister filters. They're very plain, simple filters, but they're 10 times larger in rating than my tank. So in theory, I could use them on a tank 10 times the size of mine. And indeed, some people do. They probably don't have as little algae as I have, though. I always recommend to do 3 30% water changes each week. I use this RODI water, and it's a lot of water changes, but sorry, it works. It keeps excess nutrients at a minimum and thus algae at a minimum. To adhere to something like the EI method that recommends an excess of nutrients, that philosophy is very different from my philosophy as far as dosing goes, but then it's especially important to keep up with water changes, because without enough water changes, you'll quickly build up an abundance of phosphates and other nutrients, which are the main contributors of algae. As far as fertilizer goes, if you follow the EI method or a lot of the methods that you see if you're on these forums and stuff, those will work. Your plants will be very healthy, but in my opinion, they're in excess. I use a completely different philosophy where I'm giving the plants the bare minimum of what they need to thrive. So I'm not saying the bare minimum of what they need to like live with yellow leaves. You can see my plants are very healthy, but I don't believe in, wow, you've got to use as much fertilizer as possible, etc. Because that's why so many people have algae problems. They're going way overboard on fertilizer. Regarding light, people put undue importance on the effect that light is having on their algae issues. It definitely is having an impact if you have excess nutrients in your water. If you don't, you can kind of use as much light as you want. I have my tanks in direct sunlight all day long, and I use extremely powerful lights on the light fixtures, and I don't have excess algae at all because I don't have excess nutrients in the tank. There's one other thing that I use in my tanks that really makes them look great, and that's pressurized CO2. So everything I just said applies to a low-tech tank or one that does not use CO2, but it would probably be in your best interest to use CO2 if possible, because your results will be far better than if you don't use CO2. DIY CO2 from yeast, in my opinion, really doesn't work very well. The pressure is often too small, or else it just explodes and smells terrible. So I recommend just going to a paintball shop, a methane supplier for cooking gas, or even like a brewery sometimes, and they'll fill up a compressed CO2 tank for you that you bring for like $8, and then you can use that on your tank using a diffuser and a solenoid, which I might do a video on that later on. But yeah, thanks for watching, and follow me on Instagram. Bye.